Hello and welcome to Yerushalmi Peah Daf Yud Ches in the Ozoder print. One ha'ara on the blot, and then I want to continue with the biography about Rav Yochanan, the author of Yerushalmi. So this is actually a pretty famous thing that the Gemara is talking about whether you plant the Chatzuvah plant. The Chatzuvah was a herb, according to the Ritva in Bava Basra, Daf Nun Hey and Aleph, if you want to look it up, and it's used for demarcation of property. So Amar Rav Chizda, or actually Rav Chizda Rav Chizda wanted to say, Bahem Chilek Yeshua's arts. It was with this specific plant that Yeshua divided the land by Eretz Yisrael. Also, Rav Chanina b'Shem Rav Chizda. Rav Chanina actually had a different girsa when he came from Bavel, which we talked about the travel that took place, and he said, Bahem Tiyachem Yeshua's arts. With those, Yeshua used this Chatzuvah plant in order to demarcate the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, not in comparison to the Shvatim and the portions, which was one thing that he divided, but in comparison to the outside land, what wasn't Eretz Yisrael. So big difference, but what does that mean? So it needs to be explained in Agadata, and I don't have a good shot of exactly what it means, but I do have a shot from the Ritva as to why Chatzuvah is used, and that's because the way that it grows directly downward and it doesn't spread onto any other sides. So therefore, it's a perfect candidate for being used as demarcation. And demarcation and boundaries are all about not bleeding into other people's room and space. And that certainly is a psychological point as well, that if you want to have a good boundary, it means staying in your own lane as well. And of course, there's appropriate ways to be involved with other people's lives and to offer help and support and love and care, etc. But there's also an appropriate way for boundaries, not to be a leafy plant and get involved in other people's lives. So that's definitely a big part of splitting the land. What is interesting is that it's a herb, so that means that it has an influence as far as taste. So that's an interesting thing. And maybe that hints to something about Eretz Yisrael, that Eretz Yisrael, Avirat Eretz Yisrael is machkim, that it has an influence on what we do, and just like a herb has a big influence on a dish that is made. Let's continue with Rabbi Yochanan, because there's a lot of feedback about that. So, as I mentioned before, he was a first and kind of second generation Amora, who was coming off of the Tanam period, and he lived in Tiberia, which we'll talk about in a moment, which basically had the largest amount of leaders for the future generations of Amoran, and he was considered the leading Talmud Chacham of Eretz Yisrael, and he, together with a Nasi, literally led the Jewish community. So he was probably one of the most influential ones. He learned under Yehuda Nasi, as I mentioned, so he definitely knew Mishnah as well. He was certainly a childhood prodigy. You see this because he had to have been about 15 or 16 when he joined the school of Rabbi. Just if you do the math as far as how old he was, because we know Rabbi lived in Tzipori, which is where Rav Yochanan was born, only for the last 17 years of Rabbi's life, which the Yerushalmi Klein tells us. So therefore, Rav Yochanan couldn't have been more than 15 or 16 when he came into Rabbi's yeshiva, which is an amazing age to be, brought into this elitist yeshiva. And even the Rambam writes in his Akdama to Mishneh Torah that Rav Yochanan was one of Rabbi's youngest students, but he became one of the most illustrious and most accomplished, and even had a hand in helping with the editing of the Mishnah, which makes a lot of sense. And he was therefore Baki in Mishnah and Tosefta, which obviously impacted Yerushalmi, which he documented. Again, I mentioned that he was the Uber Sharicha in Yuma. That was in yesterday, and also he was an extremely beautiful person. So we'll come to that in a moment. There's a very famous Gemara in Yuma and Avodah Zarah, and Yerushalmi also has a little bit of a girsa, but basically it says this story that Rabbi Yochanan had a very painful ailment, and he went to a Roman noblewoman who had a secret remedy. It was probably some type of herbal remedy of some sort, and he obviously paid her and got the refuah. It was a totally legal thing, and eventually he even begged her to tell him the secret ingredients, which he eventually did. And because he loved Jews so much, the next time he spoke in public, he taught the ingredients in a discourse. And the noblewoman heard about this, and she was so upset. How dare you give this out for free? You could have charged money for it. That's what she was upset about. Or what about my money? But she realized that he did it because of his love of Jews, and therefore she actually, according to one opinion, converted and became Jewish. So again, the love that he had for Eretz Yisrael and for Torah and for Jews was definitely something that was important. The Gemara says that he was so beautiful. If you want to know how beautiful he was, the Gemara says in Bava Metzia, Daf Peah Dalet Amud Aleph, then take a silver goblet as it's coming out of a crucible while it's glowing, and fill it with seeds of red pomegranate, and put red roses around the brim, and put it in a place between the sun and the shade. That's the glow of Yochanan's beauty. So he was very beautiful, and the Gemara also makes note very clearly even that he was very large and fat. So again, back then that was considered a very good thing. He was also extremely strong. There's a Gemara where he fell on his way up from steps and saved his Talmidim, and then they said, well, it's a Gemara Ksuba stuff, Bavli, Daf, where is it? Samach Beis Amud Aleph, and basically he saved his two Talmidim that were carrying him up the steps, and they said, well, if you're that strong, then why do you need us to hold you? And he said, I'm saving my strength for when I'm older, which is an amazing thing just psychologically. And anyway, the Gemara points out very clearly that he didn't have a beard, even though normally having a beard is considered a beautiful thing, but he did not. Hadras Panim, is usually a beard, and there's Kabbalistic reasons to have a beard in Eretz Yisrael, etc. I guess the Ramchal, who got into so much trouble for not having a beard in Padua, because he held that you weren't allowed to grow one in Chutz La'aretz, so I guess there's a lot to say on that. And we know he's actually the one that sat in front of the ladies' mikvah so that people would see an attractive person, and there's a lot to talk about that, but I'm not going to go into that. And again, he was probably one of the most central people of Eretz Yisrael. In fact, he's quoted by 170 people throughout Shas. That's what it's been calculated. He's quoted by 170 people, so that's definitely a lot of notoriety. We know I mentioned yesterday that he had tragically lost many of his sons, probably 10 of them, and he used to carry around the bone or something of his 10th son. So Malchukas Rishonim exactly didn't bureau what that means, but anyway, not for now. But he did have a surviving daughter, and it seems like they were pretty old when they were born, from the Gemara in Shabbos and Gittin. And he even wanted her to marry, at least one of the daughters, to marry his prize student Zeiri, but Zeiri declined, saying that he was from Bavel and she was from Eretz Yisrael. No, it's not that he didn't want an Israeli girl, even though there's what to think about as far as the cultural aspects. But he explained that there's a pure Yuchsin in Bavel, which is why it's a Gemara in Kedushin. Daf, Ayin, Aleph, and Beis. Last thing I wanted to say about him was that the very famous Gemara about his tragic dynamic with Rish Lakish and Rish Lakish's death, which is not for now, but basically the insult that was accidentally given to Rish Lakish and how that impacted him. But Rav Yochanan really, he was an old man. Again, we talked about he was probably about 100 or so, or over 100 according to Benny. And again, Rav Yochanan is very famous that his eyebrows were covering his eyes, and his attendants would actually have to uncover it if he wanted to see. Partially because he was old, partially because he was a Baal Basar. I've mentioned this earlier when I spoke about him, that there's probably Kabbalistic things here as well. For example, one of the most famous Kabbalists is called Rav Yitzchak Sagi Nor, the blind one. And as they say, like the Bava Tzali covered his eyes because the more you don't see, the more you actually do see. So there's probably some element of Kedusha there as well, from this Rav Yochanan ben Nuri that we're talking about. But basically, when Reish Lakish died, he missed this Chavrusa, so he was replaced with a Chavrusa who basically would bring him proofs to what he said. So he told Rav Elazar that you're supposed to be like Reish Lakish. With Reish Lakish, whenever I would say something, he would have 24 kashas on me, and then I would have to answer it with 24 but solutions. But that made a give and take. But for you, you're just bringing me rias. He said, oh, he missed Reish Lakish, and he actually, the Gemara Bava Metzia Daf Peah Dalet Amud Aleph says that he eventually died from his sorrow of this. And again, with all the tragedies that he went through in life of losing 10 children and everything he endured and being a Yasom, that's not what killed him. What killed him was the fact that he didn't have a Chavrusa to fight with, which is an amazing thing. I saw a story by Rav Shach. It's hard to understand, but also brings out some of this point that when his wife passed away, she had been an amazing rock by his side that had supported him, but somebody saw him in the hospital visiting her, and then when he passed away, somebody heard him saying these words, and he kept saying "Lulei Sorescha Shashui Azavarati Ba'ani," and they said, "Well, what's pshat?" So he said that the Torah literally keeps me alive. I heard this about Rav Chaim Kanievsky, also a similar idea, that the Torah is what keeps me alive, and it wasn't necessarily the grief that was killing him, but it was the Torah that was sustaining him and giving him life and purpose and a connection, understanding of Hashem in his most difficult times. And literally, that's what we see from the holy Tanoim and Amoraim, that Torah was literally their life. All right, have a great day.